Good morning. So, this is our first episode of the Tech Captains podcast. So, for those who have been following until now, there's been more than 35 CTOs interviewed in writing, with written interviews being published every 2 weeks. And we're trying this new format with Gareth, CTO who've been interviewed in the past. And we will interview somebody else from a startup or large corporate, any size of company, different industries, and they have the conversation going in this new format, which we hope you will like. So for this first episode, we have Robert Chandler. Thank you for accepting, Robert, to be the first person.
Of course, looking forward to it, Ron.
So Robert studied engineering at the University of Cambridge. You worked alongside your studies, and I believe you spent a few years in the AI space. And we go way back, as we met about 10 years ago at a hackathon in London.
Yeah.
So to start, I'm interested to know what made you want to study engineering, and how did that lead you to the AI field?
Yeah, I think I'd always wanted to do something in the STEM field, in the STEM area. And for me, it was probably ended up being, by the time I was choosing university, it was either going to be engineering or computer science. And I think I'd always been kind of very practical, very hands-on, and loved things in the real world, which meant that I was less interested in learning computer science at university. I also had the sort of idea that I can teach myself to code. Why not learn other things at university that are harder to teach yourself, and if you need more lab work to do kind of structural engineering and things. So actually at Cambridge, the course was very general for 2 years, which when I was applying was very appealing. You could do structures, mechanics, materials, and then information engineering, electronics. But yeah, ended up specializing in information engineering, which is, I guess, very much about processing data, computer vision, machine learning, signal processing, and yeah, a lot of the AI stuff. So a lot of the research, the AI research at Cambridge is done in the engineering department rather than the computer science department. And yeah, I think it was kind of a natural progression from there into self-driving cars. So I did an internship in my final year of university, or just before my final year of university, at a small startup called 5AI in the UK, where I think when I was interviewing, there were about 8 people in the entire company. By the time I joined, there were about 30, and we were working out of a co-working space. And then, by the time I left, sort of 160 people. We'd gone through Series B, tried to launch our own self-driving vehicle, and eventually got acquired, which was kind of exciting journey.
How did you find the sort of internships? Was that useful? Was that valuable? You did 2, right?
Yeah, so I did one in the Internet of Things. So I guess another kind of another sort of scenario where I've gone, I love computer science, but I also love the real world, or I love engineering and I love the real world. So it's like Internet of Things, it's going to be awesome. It's going to change the world. And I think that was super helpful. I think I came in as someone quite junior, was given a lot of freedom because it was a startup that I joined to kind of make a big messy pile of code that now if I saw looking back, I'd be very embarrassed by. But I guess I delivered features, fixed bugs, probably introduced as many bugs as I fixed, and had that kind of, I guess, ability to learn in a real environment. So I think internships are super valuable. I then, I guess the sort of later internship I did 2 years later, was a chance to, where I was a little bit more of a capable engineer, capable programmer, and I was still given a huge amount of freedom. I actually ended up building what turned into the annotation tooling for 5AI. So it was kind of an automated pipeline for annotating lanes that was sort of being plumbed together, or hadn't been plumbed together. I plumbed it together and then realized that, actually, if we add a few human tweaks to this, we can suddenly make it sort of 10 times higher quality annotation with really low human input, and sort of end up building a web UI and a back end. And then I think that kind of evolved from there into this fully fledged 3D annotation tool with all the different sensor data in there. And that's actually the team that I rejoined after I left. I kind of expected when I left that this would really been like a fun intern project that they'd decide, actually, you know what, that's not useful and we'll leave it. But it was kind of exciting that they formed a whole team around this this intern project.
That's very interesting. I mean, like I also, like a year ago, so you co-founded and by default became CTO of HeyDaily. So maybe you can tell us more about it, what it is, how you got to that.
Sure. I think let's start with the what, and then we can go into the sort of the why and how. So what is HeyDaily? HeyDaily is the easiest way for creators to monetize their audience through subscriptions. So there are millions of creators out there. There's 22 million creators on Instagram alone with between 50,000 and 1 million followers. And our hypothesis is that at this sort of scale, unless you're like a lifestyle influencer, it's really difficult for you to monetize your audience to a level where you're able to quit your day job and just kind of do what you love. And there's this kind of famous Tim Ferriss article that sort of all you need is 1,000 true fans. So if you've got 1,000 people that are willing to pay you $10 a month every month, then you're making sort of north of $100,000 a year. And that's enough for pretty much anyone in the world, even if you're living in some of the most expensive cities, to live a very kind of happy life and just focus on your creative endeavors. So the kind of the real goal of HeyDaily is to help as many creators as possible achieve that kind of financial freedom, just doing the things that they're great at. And at this sort of scale, so once you're above 1 million followers, you can afford to kind of take the risk to start your own app. You can think of like Joe Wicks and Jen Selter. They've all kind of got products and apps and things where they can take that financial hit, and you can also get massive brand deals. But I think at a smaller scale, especially if you're not in a niche where there's like tons of brands that will sponsor you, then you need some other ways to monetize. And for a lot of those, that for a long time there wasn't another way. So you had OnlyFans was like a great way of kind of monetizing. At one point, you could offer a subscription service, but it very quickly got stigmatized by kind of pornographic content, and now no creator can launch themselves on OnlyFans without kind of a lot of questions from their friends and family asking like, "What are you doing?"
I think it would be difficult, wouldn't it? Yeah.
The subscribers then, or the fans might not want to subscribe on
Yeah.
OnlyFans for the kind of like, I don't want an OnlyFans login, or even more, the even worse, they might subscribe expecting kind of different kind of content than the educational or fitness content that you're providing. So kind of, I guess all this kind of massive amount of creators in the creator space, kind of low opportunities for monetizing, led to HeyDaily being this white labeled platform where you could really easily start a subscription service. So we create the landing page, we handle the payments, we handle all the subscription management, and we allow the creators to just send out exclusive content. It can be videos, voice notes, text, images, directly to their users. And kind of the sort of special thing is we use SMS. And so sometimes people go, "Oh, SMS, that's sort of an ancient archaic technology." But there's a few really good reasons. And the first one is we want to be white labeled. So I kind of mentioned OnlyFans. There have been other platforms that have spun up with the premise of being like OnlyFans, but not for porn. And unfortunately, they've already got stuck in the same kind of, so they've already got brushed with some form of stigma. So Fan House, they raised, I think, $20 million from Anderson Horowitz. They have on their platform the Botos sisters. These amazing chess players. And they have millions of followers on the internet, but their Fan House page, the top of the line of their bio for a very long time says, "We don't send feet pics." And I think that's because Fan House allows lewd content, but not nude content. And so it sort of got this stigma of like, oh, Fan House is the place where people send feet pics. And therefore people that have launched on Fan House with their kind of own platform have been tarred by the branding of kind of the Fan House page, or at least the stigma associated to the company. So with HeyDaily, with SMS, we're able to be super white labeled. No one knows they're subscribing to HeyDaily. They just know they're subscribing to their favorite creator. And that way we can kind of host the death metal rock star that's like praising the devil in his lyrics, and the priest influencer that's sending out Bible quotes without it being like a weird for them to be on the same platform.
I love the way you quoted those two extremes there. So we go from priest to devil worshippers. So when I saw it, I took a look at it, I think yesterday, and my first thought was, oh, it's Substack for messaging.
Yeah.
Is that a reasonable summary of it?
That is a very reasonable summary.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think Substack's another example of where like a certain subset of creators have been able to monetize fantastically. using kind of email, but the issue with email is it has a very, very low open rate. So even a lot of I think a lot of emails that you want to receive and do receive, you end up not opening them. I think the actual numbers are somewhere around 30%, whereas SMS has a 95, 98% open rate for content, which is just a sort of a massively more.
Plus, email delivery is hard. People don't realize how difficult it actually is.
Yes,
it's really hard.
At least a bunch of platforms have helped with.
Yeah.
So you can use ConvertKit or Substack to actually help get into people's inboxes. But yeah, if you're sending marketing emails or sales emails, as I'm sure, or anyone running a company has been doing, you have to do a lot of fun things to make sure you can actually get into people's inboxes and not lost in spam or promotions.
That's a good point. That's the struggle of today. You used to be happy when you receive an email. Now you'd rather receive a physical letter. And Robert, like before this interview, to go a bit more into the technical side of it, you mentioned to me that you changed the tech stack. So I don't know if you want to expand a bit of what challenges you encountered into changing the full tech stack of a project that's already been a few months old.
Yeah. So to kind of set the scene, I joined HeyDaily just over a year ago now. But the company got started a couple of months before, and a sort of a tech team had been being assembled by my co-founder, who's sort of who I studied at Cambridge with him. So he's also got a technical background, but he'd been a CEO for the last how many years beforehand, rather than being like directly in the technical. So he kind of made a few judgment calls on what the tech stack should be that weren't optimal, is probably the way of putting it politely. So there was a Java Spring backend, and obviously a React JavaScript front end. So the front end obviously fine, back end not ideal for a startup. And I think there's nothing wrong inherently with Java. I think there's kind of this very slow iteration cycle where you actually have to kind of write the code, compile it, spin up a Java server, then you can like run the tests. So actually that dev test loop is very slow. And I think also a lot of Java developers are used to working on very massive projects for kind of much more legacy code bases. So in banks or in very big companies. And that means that there's fewer, it's like harder to hire a team that's got the right kind of attitude towards working in a startup and working on big things and willing to take the risk to kind of just like write it in C rather than, study the documentation, really implement the proper thing, expect it to work almost first time when you run it. And yeah, the amount of verbosity you have to do to put in Java, it helps you down the line. It helps you avoid certain amounts of tech debt, but yeah, for a startup, it wasn't the right choice. So I kind of came in, we had something that was more or less together with the Java tech stack, but was a little bit disparate. So rather than saying, okay, let's start from scratch, because we wanted to launch MVP and get that product feedback, I was like, okay, let's pull this together. Let's cut the features that are unimportant. Let's really build the MVP, make sure all these APIs that you've kind of built in this microservices over-engineered thing can talk to each other. And let's get it deployed in like as easy as possible on AWS. So I threw it on Fargate and like kind of got that deployed. And then sort of we did the MVP, got it launched with our first customers, added the first kind of extension features, which was scheduling of posts. So that no longer did the creator have to actually kind of create the content and send it out in one go. They could create it and kind of schedule out like weeks in advance if they wanted to. So a very important feature. But at that point, it was like, okay, we either keep adding features to the Java tech stack or we change it to something that's more suitable going forwards. And it's a little bit of a difficult choice. So obviously, you rewriting code is kind of a programmer's like, it's like, like starting from scratch is every programmer's dream. They'd love to be like, I can build it so much better from the start, but it's very rarely the right decision. But in this instance, I think it was clear that we'd have to invest heavily in kind of dev tools and infrastructure and any like all sorts of things to make the dev test loop fast, and also finding the right engineers would be hard long term. So I kind of made the call to switch to a full stack TypeScript serverless application. And yeah, that took longer than expected. There was kind of a few challenges there. So the tech stack we've gone for now is using a framework called Serverless Stack, which is
I love Serverless Stack. Yeah, Serverless Stack's really good, and it's cross cloud platform too, isn't it?
It's so this is just AWS. It's actually built on top of the CDK framework, so it's not serverless framework.
Oh, it's not the serverless framework. Okay, sorry, misunderstand. Okay,
subtly different. I think Serverless Stack was previously a component of serverless framework, but has for the last few years been its own thing. But it provides a really lovely developer experience for serverless, because you can you get the same millisecond dev test loop that you get as if you're running kind of code locally, but it's actually always running on the cloud, so you don't have to mock anything. You're writing even the infrastructure in TypeScript rather than kind of Serverless Stack. Serverless Framework, I believe, has sort of long YAML files that you have to kind of manage, and they get a little bit messy. So everything is always running on the cloud. But when you're writing code locally, it's kind of instant change reflected on the cloud. And that means you're always using the real resources. You're always using the actual AWS queues, the AWS kind of buckets. You're never having to mock any of these quite complicated managed resources. And I think the issue most kind of tech teams face when they want to be using these managed resources is like, well, if I use it, then I'll have to mock it. And if I mock it, then that'll take time, or it'll be mocked wrong. Or like when I actually come to deploying it, there's so many more chances for bugs to creep in. Or you say, okay, well, I'm not going to mock it, but I'm always going to write it in the cloud. But then there's no way to, you kind of have to test that separately, or you basically, you don't have a chance when you're developing to test it at all. You just kind of have these two separate systems where you're testing something locally that's very different to what's actually deployed. But this serverless stack means that everything is always the same. It's always like every developer is running their own version of prod effectively. Where was I going with this? Yes, so it's quite a big shift from kind of Java backend and JavaScript front end to a full stack TypeScript. And we had two Java backend developers that needed to kind of learn TypeScript in order to kind of contribute to this project. And I think, having been myself a polyglot programmer for years, I thought, well, surely learning a new language is somewhat, it's just like you just read the X in Y minutes or whatever doc and do the hello world type project, and then you'll be able to be reasonably effective in the language. And once you've experimented a little bit, you kind of learn. But it definitely took a lot longer than expected, because these two developers were kind of Java purists. They'd always just studied and learned Java. So I think that was definitely a downside. And I think the bigger part was, one of the Java developers was sort of 3 or 4 years into their career and were actually quite reluctant in the end, although they'd said they were quite positive and like keen to learn this new TypeScript and like add to their CV. In the end, after a few months, it was like the progress wasn't as good as we'd hoped. And then we learned his motivations were actually still very much towards the Java world, and all the things he wanted to learn were still in the Java world. It's like, okay, clearly there's not an alignment here, and we had to kind of part ways very, very amicably, but not sort of one of those things that you have to kind of I've learned more as a CTO that probably should have made that decision sooner and kind of had those harder conversations, like really tried to draw out like the motivations earlier, rather than believe what I was hearing, that it was like, oh yeah, no, I'm very keen to learn this thing, whereas actually there wasn't as much passion behind there as was needed for to be successful.
Your first version then, so your first version was Java backend deployed onto Fargate. Were you actually selling a product at that point? Was it actually sort of in production and you had users?
Yes.
So what was the process like then how long did it take you to rewrite it, and how did you sort of transition from the old one to the new one? What was that like?
Yeah, so I think I initially estimated it was about a 4-week project. And I initially was like, okay, this will be about 4 weeks, and that'll be a very worthwhile investment, because we'll be able to release many more features way faster, and we'll be able to hire full stack developers that can work on the kind of front end and back end, depending on where we have more needs. Ended up taking closer to 3 months, including the full kind of transition. Actually transitioning, because we only had probably 20 or so creators on the platform. So they're the only ones that had kind of data to transfer over. Everything else was handled on Stripe for all the customer data. So at transferring their data across was quite straightforward. We just mapped from the kind of previous DB schema that was a Postgres database into our DynamoDB schema, transferred all the data, and just created new Cognito users for all these creators, and just let them know that their password has been reset, and there's this new system that they'll log into, but it looks the same as before, and it acts the same as before, and there'll be new features coming soon, type of thing. So they were very, very easy transition to do, but we're at a scale where we didn't have sort of like multiple concurrent users on the platform at all times. It's very easy to have an hour of downtime whilst we switch over. Although I think even down the line, it's not too terrible to have an hour or so of downtime, because it was still quite a short amount of downtime. But yeah, that was another reason actually for switching over from Java to TypeScript. This is that deploying all the microservices makes it quite difficult to orchestrate that kind of no downtime transition, especially when you've got kind of database schema migrations that are going on. But with the serverless Lambda world, we can basically have zero downtime. We just let CloudFormation spin up the new stack and then tear down the old stack, and everything transitions over very nicely.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. One of the things that drives me crazy these days, and it seems to be banks, and I know they struggle with big old legacy systems, is you go to log on and go, oh, we're down for maintenance for half of Saturday. And I just go, I'm in 2022 now. What are you guys doing? But yeah, I know it's a real struggle. And if you've got a really old system that was built 30 years ago, processing billions of pounds a day, it's a person with you're going to put your career there if you're going to say, well, we're going to rebuild all of this in some new serverless framework or something like that, right? So I get it. It's interesting.
No, it's funny because I've heard someone tell me once that not so long ago that NatWest is forward thinking and very modern because they have a big project to move to the cloud or AWS within the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's a bit what you say.
And how have you dealt with? So you're running serverless, and how have you dealt with the sort of cold start? Well, it's not really a problem because AWS have done a lot to address that, and in fact, quite recently with the reInvent, they did something with the Java. If you're running Java for Lambdas, but how have you found that?
So I think Java was about 10x slower than sort of JavaScript and Python. So they've now made it 10x faster with some sort of clever caching. The cold start for kind of JavaScript is what we're running, or Node.js has been very short. And a lot of what we do, I guess, a lot of things are going on in the back end. So it doesn't matter actually if you've got a cold start of 100 milliseconds. Like it's just spinning up something that's handled against some queue, that's hitting some scheduler, that's sending out some message or doing some So a lot of what we do doesn't have the cold start problem. The kind of biggest part where we need really, really fast responses is when on the post view. So when a user gets a post and they click the link, they will want to see that page as quickly as possible. And we're yet to kind of really dive down into the optimization there and kind of work out what we can do to make it super fast. One kind of non-technical way we've got around that is by having an animating loader that unlocks the post. So actually, it doesn't matter. It takes an extra clever UI to hide the complexities, but certainly I think down the line that the way we'd get around that is to do some form of either static site kind of generation for like that particular post. So that way it's all cached and it's all on the CDN. It's all sort of instant view. Or you can do, there's all sorts of kind of caching things you can do. I mean, the other great thing as well is actually unless you're the first person to hit that post, that for the next 15 minutes, that Lambda's cached. And because all our posts go out kind of in one go, we actually have very spiky traffic. So it's kind of only the first person that hits that cold start, and then it's all a very fast response.
Makes sense. That's very interesting. Always interesting to hear the setup, the DevOps infra side of AWS, GCP, Azure setup. There's so many tools that have fancy names to say things that have been existing for 20 years. So that's so interesting. So just to conclude this interview, Robert, I just want to know if you have maybe any fun fact or horror story that happened through your career?
Um,
Anything that's not
I,
classified?
I think some of the most fun things were at 5AI where you'd be generating kind of visualizations for things and they'd go wrong, but they'd look really pretty. They'd look like some art. So we had a folder on the Google Drive at 5AI that was like art modern or something, and it was anytime your visualizations messed up because you got the axes around the wrong way or something, and you ended up with some rather than a beautiful put cloud of the scene you're looking at, you end up with kind of just a mess of points that were all colorful. People would put them in the folder, and there was this art gallery. So I actually put quite a few visualizations in that folder, and then a few, probably like about a year ago, they were doing a kind of a hiring push, and they looked into this art folder and started putting everyone's LinkedIn cover photo as some of these like art modern pieces, basically where the visualizations have messed up. It's yeah. So I that was quite kind of fun to be the artist behind some of our hiring campaigns purely by accident.
The thing of iRobot with Will Smith when he's asking the robot what's the difference between the robot and the human, right? It's like they can make art and the robot makes art in front of him.
Yes, the got stable diffusion and everything has got very impressive. I've been playing with ChatGPT as well in the last few days, and it's
Oh, actually, I was going to ask. So I actually wanted to ask you about that because of your AI background. So what did you think about this recent release? I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And I was talking to Ron just before this, and I saw somebody had actually had it create a Linux VM
yeah.
and a Python script inside a Docker, and I'm trying to get my head around what is actually happening there. What is it actually doing?
I actually got it to. I saw that Linux VM and I got it to create an SVG file of a snowman. And I was like, can this text based like AI generate art in the same way? Like not in the same way as the kind of stable diffusion and DALL-E esque things. And it sort of worked. It gave me a round white circle with a few kind of dots for eyes and a couple of dots for mouth. It wasn't a particularly good snowman, but I thought that was incredibly impressive that it's able to do generation of all sorts. But I genuinely think we're going through a step change again in AI. Or I still don't really like calling it AI, but everyone uses the term AI. I think maybe generative AI is closer to AI than a lot of what we were doing before, which was very much machine learning. So I think there was the big step change that kind of led to all these self-driving car startups where computer vision suddenly got good. So we had all these neural networks that are able to do detection and classification and segmentation, and we sort of have the ability now to perceive the world around us if you throw in a whole load of annotated data. And what's really cool about this kind of latest stage of AI is like it's not being given a huge amount of annotations. It's just being given access to massive data sets of like all the text that's ever been written on the internet, or all the images that are on the internet accompanied with a bit of text, and it's done kind of self-supervised learning. And I think with the recent ChatGPT, it's had like reinforcement learning. So there has been humans in the loop trying to kind of rank its responses, but a lot of the kind of power of the language model has come from just like ingesting vast volumes of data. So yeah, I think exciting things are coming. I even got it to tell me. So we're having a discussion about how we could push to the Slack, like any Slack channel we wanted. And we were like, I wonder if the Slack API can do this. So we just like we were having a look at the Slack API docs yesterday in sprint planning, and they were like, actually, you know what? Let's type it into ChatGPT and see if it knows. And it did. It really literally spat out like, this is how you send a message, and it's like you put your channel ID here, and it's like, how do I get a channel ID? And it's like, use this API and call this bit, and like here's the code to do it. It's like, okay, this is cool. So it's coming for our jobs, but I think it's the biggest thing. It's going to help absolutely kind of increase productivity for people across all sorts of industries.
Yeah, I mean, I saw something because the other thing that's happened is I saw Stack Overflow have put a temporary ban right on people posting code samples from this as well. Yeah, I don't know exactly how they're going to do that, but that's what they've done. Because I saw another demo as well with an IDE where you're literally putting comments for your code, and then the code's getting created underneath as you're going. So yeah, it's moving very, very fast, definitely.
I think Google Colabs or Copilot or Copilot was very cool. I know a lot of people that use that and really rate it very highly. But I think it's one of those tools that's still in its infancy, so it's only useful sort of 40% of the time, or only like, but it still makes you more productive net if you know when to listen to it and when to ignore it. So I think we're going in exciting directions, and I'm kind of very excited to see what happens going forwards with all these large language models and image generation models. And I think there's so many industries or so many kind of tasks that previously weren't automatable but now are tractably automatable, and it's kind of, I think it's the new internet over the next decade.
So is this the real Web 3 then, is it? Or Internet 3? I don't know. People, it's funny how people still get Web and Internet confused, isn't it?
Yes, I think, yes. Web 3, I'm not bullish on, personally. But
yeah, there's a whole other discussion there, because I have some strong... I mean, I'm a crypto fan, but I think a lot of Web 3 is nonsense, basically. About 80% of it is rubbish.
A lot of pyramid schemes that pretend not to be pyramid schemes. And then... actually valuable technology that we will probably all will be paying with cryptocurrencies that are backed by some government in future. But I think the fully decentralized nature leads to a lot of kind of I don't know, abuse of trust. I think it's like the idea is you don't need any trust in this system, but then you have kind of people shelling snake oil and building pyramid schemes out of it.
But I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding, isn't there, that about this, that the notion of decentralization, because the internet is decentralized. That was the whole reason it was built, right? It was built to survive a nuclear attack. That was the original design of it, if I remember, right, by DARPA. So it was to build a network that could withstand, almost, destruction of vast areas of the United States. So to me, it's not a technical problem; it's a political problem. But like I say, it's another discussion, isn't it? Really. So.
For another day, probably.
Another day, exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We'll do that in another day, in another podcast. Maybe we can discuss deeper into the AI. Have you back, Robert? But first and foremost, thank you so much for accepting to be the first into this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
It takes a bit of guts to try it. Very interesting, very insightful, good discussions. And for anyone, if you're listening or watching us right now, so we will be having interviews every 2 weeks, published on Tuesdays. And if you have any suggestions of anybody insightful in the world of tech that you want to suggest to us to interview, please do recommend, and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Good luck with HeyDaily, and
cheers, Ron. Cheers, Gareth.
You'll be the Substack, like I say, the Substack of messaging. So the next unicorn out of the UK. Thanks,
hopefully.
Rob.
Cheers. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.